Okay, thank you so much for coming back for Paul Vanderklay's Randos conversation. For anybody who doesn't know Paul Vanderklay, he has this thing that he does on the internet where he brings random people onto his YouTube channel and just asks them questions about their stories. That's how me and Paul met. I actually coined the term randos, so there's a little lore for you there. So I have picked someone out for Paul to have a rando conversation with. And Paul, can you confirm you have no idea who you're about to talk to?
I have no idea who I'm going to talk to, which is pretty normal for these conversations.
All right, so please give a round of applause for Becky, our rando of the day.
Does she have her own? Okay, I was going to say. Becky, what a pleasure to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. It's great to be here.
Do you know anything about me?
I've been swatting up because Cassidy gave me a bit of a head start about this, so I've listened to lots of you in the last week. So it's really,
all right.
I feel like I've spent loads of time with you this week. So
Because often what happens is people ask me for a conversation, and then we have it, and often just explaining to people what I do online is usually this happens over Zoom. And the first thing I'll ask people is, would you like me to record it? I'll usually suggest that we do record it because then they can look back if they want to remember something. And then because I have a tradition of putting this on my channel, people will then, some people want to be on the channel. Some people don't want to be on the channel. A lot are in between. I'll say, we'll record it, you can look at it, and you can decide, yada, yada, yada. So, there's a question that I usually begin with, and everybody's waiting for me to ask it, but that would be anticlimactic. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am in my late 20s. I'm married. I have a little boy, and he is the person with whom I spend the most of my time at the moment. Just in the last month, I've resigned / was encouraged to resign from church ministry. That was my dream for kind of where my life was going to go, was working in churches. It's what I've been doing for the entirety of my adult life. But after the birth of my son, I had a very transformational experience, which I guess I either wasn't able to translate into the work that I was doing, or the context I was in wasn't maybe that welcoming for the kinds of wrestling that came out of that experience, and how it's shaped me and how it's shaped how I want to be with others and walk alongside others. I grew up in Suffolk in East Anglia, the most easterly part of the UK, and I grew up in a family where my mum was a very passionate Christian and my dad was willing to participate in going along to church and raising us as Christians, though he probably wouldn't have said he had a faith of his own. We went to a very family-oriented Anglican church, and I knew from a very young age that I felt this was real and true, and the most beautiful thing that I had kind of ever locked eyes on was the story of Jesus on the cross. So as a child, I decided that was kind of what I wanted to be all in on, and that formed the basis of my identity. And I then got very involved in, like, I guess in the US you would call like seeker sensitive. So I got very involved in like a seeker sensitive church in my late teens, which is like a church that kind of pivoted all of the things, services, everything that it did in like an attractional way to kind of connect with the culture around us. And I was really, really heavily involved in that. In my late teens, I decided I wanted to work in the local church. I went to university, did biblical studies and theology, discovered like a profound love and kind of, I was enamored with the Bible and its richness and how many different things it revealed and unfolded as you looked into it further, and wrestled with lots of doubts while I was at university because I studied in a secular setting, so it was very much like very critical approach to the biblical text, Christian history, all of that. And that was very formative for me, and then subsequently I went and began working in church ministry, and I've hopped around in roles in church ministry until 1 month ago, and now I'm here.
Wow. Wow. How old's your little boy?
So he is going to be 2 in July, and yeah, it was really his birth that it was the most transformational experience in my life, and what happened afterwards, and yeah, so that's what's led me to where I am.
I'm a little curious about this transformation. Well, having any child is a transformational experience, especially for the mom, but usually often for the dad. So did something special happen with that?
Yes, special is probably not the word I would use for it, unfortunately. I couldn't cope with becoming a mum, and it was the most petrifying thing that ever happened to me. The realization of having a newborn, which, funnily enough, I'd thought a lot about what it would be like to have a child. I didn't think very much about what it would be like to have a baby, and I was, everyone always says, nothing can prepare you, but I felt there must have been something completely wrong with me in how ill-prepared I felt and how unable to cope with the reality of having a baby I was. And I didn't know what to do with that. And so it was to the extent that I kind of didn't think that my little boy would grow up with a mum. And obviously, so prior to that, 2 weeks before I had my boy, I was preaching at a church weekend away. A month before that, I'd been speaking at a conference for kind of training people in doing church in a way that relates to unchurched people. And so I was so resonated with what Nemo said this morning about I can't articulate to you how invested, and not just invested, but how confident I was in my faith. How convinced I was that it was true, and that probably, if I'm honest now, how convinced I was that I had the answers. But after I had my son, I just felt, as I kind of cried out to God to help me through this situation, and not even, I would say to God, not even for me, but for the sake of this child that you've allowed to come into the world, don't let him have such a disappointing mother. And I just felt totally abandoned. I'd never experienced such a sense of isolation and aloneness, and that there really wasn't somebody listening. And I wasn't ready for that. My conception of faith wasn't ready for that, and I lost sight of God in my map of the world. I couldn't locate him. I didn't know where to locate him, and so that experience then sort of culminated in me really questioning and ultimately verging on the loss of my faith. So interestingly, while I was swatting up for today, I listened to one of the podcasts you've released very recently, and you were talking about the difference between, well, not the difference, but understanding God as both agent and arena in the world. Agent, the one who acts, intervenes, reveals himself in the person of Jesus, but arena, the one in whom all this action takes place and in whom we live and move and have our being. And the version of God that I was introduced to as a child and that I had come to, I thought, know and love was an agent in reality, someone who existed within the number of all things that exist. And like ultimately, and I'm happy to unpack it, this experience led me from seeing God only as agent to coming to have faith in him as the arena in which all things take place. But having just this kind of agency idea of God, and then two, I was raised with a version of faith which was hyper individualistic. The good news was you as an individual are loved by God, and Jesus Jesus died for you. And one of the lines I would hear all the time growing up: if it had only been you, Jesus would have died for you. And so the whole gospel was about me. I was like the center of the frame, and I couldn't connect this experience I was having of like feeling totally abandoned. I couldn't connect that with this version of the good news that I'd been presented with, which was, this is how much God loves you as an individual and all that he would do for you. I don't want. Would you like to interrupt at any point?
No, you're doing very well. And I first, wow. When Cassidy asked this idea, I thought, yeah. But I said, it's going to have to be a brave person that I talk to. And I just want to say that I really admire your courage to tell a story like that, like this, in a venue like this. Because usually when I do this, it's just two of us on Zoom, and in that way there's no potential exposure, and you're telling this story in a very public way. And I just want to have you know that I really see the courage, and I admire that in you, and the honesty, because this clearly is a big deal. This is a big, big deal. Had you ever had any kind of impasse like this in your relationship with God before the birth of your son?
I wouldn't say I had doubts about the Jesus as divine whilst I was at university, particularly in my second year. We went through a module on the historical Jesus and read, for the first time I was exposed to like a hypercritical view of kind of flattening Jesus out to being like any other kind of messianic claim in the first century. And that shook me, but the kind of relational aspect of living with the understanding that I'm relating to and able to speak to and praise a God who hears me. That hadn't been called into question in my life before. And that was a shock, and the timing of it was so inconvenient.
Well, it's as someone who is also been involved in professional ministry, there's an unfairness to this vocation, because as you know, you're working with people who have their ups and their downs in their relationship with God. And in some ways, you're not allowed to have one. And if you are having one, you have to sort of keep it quiet, which also immediately puts you in a trap, because now suddenly you're feeling like you're not being honest with the people you're ministering to. And there are trade-offs in that space too, because some people who are having doubts and difficulties would be happy to hear that you're having them too. And other people, especially because this is a vocation and often a paid vocation, will say, hey, wait a minute, you're paid to be our example. How dare you, how dare you have a problem? And the trap that clergy and church workers find themselves in is that if you have a problem, well, what does that mean? Loss of identity, loss of status, loss of employment, difficulties in familial relationships because, as you said, and usually I can be less careful in just an online private conversation about the stories of others because they stay private, but obviously in a venue like this, it's, you have to be careful with the stories of those around you that you love. But having a crisis of faith that is as profound as the one that you shared with us is incredibly disruptive. And if you just had any secular vocation, not only could you sort of have this and have the freedom to be open about this, but in some ways there would be a church there to back you. But now, all of the dynamics put you in a spot where there's a lot of temptation to not be honest. There's going to be a lot of payment to be honest. And in your story, there's the additional layer of you've not only been in this vocation, but now you've added a new, really foundational and fundamental identity to your life, which is mom. So I can really see the spot you were in and continue to be in because it doesn't go away.
Sure. So and the kind of secondary aspect of that was that I guess I kind of felt like reflecting on the church ministry I'd been a part of before this happened, I needed to recant a lot of my words and even a lot of my, maybe not so much my convictions, but the level of conviction I'd expressed my convictions with. That after the kind of feeling of abandonment was a catalyst for then a kind of a barrage of doubts. I think Jared talked this morning about evangelicals in particular who are living with like a cognitive dissonance, and I got this like barrage of doubts that I'd probably shelved or thought like that doesn't bother me too much, and that began to sort of like pick away at the story that I'd come to adopt and love about why the world is here, who human beings are to God, and how salvation comes through Jesus, and what the future is. And so I would, I'd wake up at like 1 a.m. and be like, but why were there dinosaurs for so many years? And like just all these things that in the past hadn't bothered me. Like somebody might have said, oh, dinosaurs, and yeah. But I'd be in like cold sweats. Like, why were there dinosaurs? Why would there have been history of this planet for like billions of years before humans came on the scene if the whole of this was so that Jesus could let me know that he loves me?
Why did you need the dinosaurs? Dinosaurs were irrelevant.
Let's fast forward.
They're a problem.
Fast forward to the birth of Becky so I can let her know I love her. I think this was like picking apart a lot of, and also kind of the background tradition I'd had is you don't go near Catholicism, you don't go near these more ritualized expressions of Christian worship. These are, working to earn your salvation, and we don't want to participate in those things. And I was finding when I got to the point where I was ready to, sorry, I'm jumping about a bit, but basically when I came to the point where I thought, I think this is game over for my faith, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what life will be like now. My marriage was founded on our shared faith. I'd had my son because of my faith. Like, I believed that all the reasons why I believed it was worthwhile to procreate were founded on my faith. And my vocation, my family connections, all of my friendships, many of my friendships. And so I came to this point where I kind of said to my husband, look, I think I'm losing this. I think I'm not going to be a Christian anymore. And I don't know what that's going to mean. I don't know how to live my life without that basis. And he was amazing and said to me, tell you what, I'll continue to believe it for both of us for the time being. And let's just thank God he had been watching Jordan Peterson for years. So presented with a wife in existential crisis, he was ready. And so he said, look, there's this whole web of stuff that's going on right now, and we just need to find one thread, and let's just confront that question, and then we will move on to the next question, and we'll move on to the next question. And so I began to explore answers from all sorts of different places I never had looked up before. We read the Catholic Catechism together. I began to read Orthodox theology. I was fortunately, Jordan Peterson released his gospel series around this time, so I was watching that and listening to Jonathan Pageau. I'd never heard him before. I'd never heard people talk about the Bible in the way he was talking about the Bible. I didn't know you were allowed to kind of find truth without a kind of scientific way of approaching the text, and a historical critical way of approaching the text. And so my kind of reading and the influences got broadened so much, but then this was the piece that was, sorry, to your point, this was the piece that became so difficult to put together with the job role that I was in, was that we had a way of thinking about things, and we had a way of presenting what's true, and we had a way of presenting apologetics. And listening to the apologetics panel was so interesting, because I'd been so trained in that always be closing approach of resurrection, and bam, and if the resurrection's true, then it's all true, and the resurrection's true, isn't it? It's because here are the reasons. And I remember being in my bathroom one morning and literally slumping against the wall in the realization that I didn't witness the resurrection. And I was so, I'd kind of adopted this apologetic that said, here are the facts. We know that the resurrection happened, and that means all of these things. And I just realized I don't know it in the way that I thought I knew it, and I'd been trained to think that I know it. I didn't see it happen. And I think I'd substituted faith for knowledge. I'd come to a place in my faith where it was actually kind of an arrogant position of, well, no, we know these things to be true. And so when I really was woken up to the reality of well, I don't know these things, and I certainly don't know them enough now that I'm confronted with the reality of raw human existence of a baby, and I'm asking all these new questions about what it is to be a human being, and how we got here, and what the good life is, and how I should raise him. Yeah, that was convoluted.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't convoluted. You're very clear. Believe me, I've had much more difficult randos. There's a lot here. You said a little bit before about when your son was born, you flesh it out for me. You said something about how you were still preaching and you were working, and what was it about the birth of your son that provoked this moment, do you think? You might not know. It might take, this is something that's really awful to say now that I'm 62, but I can say it now that I'm 62, that you're young. Life has a lot of unexpected ups and downs. I got here I left Sacramento on Wednesday, I got here on Thursday. I did a live stream video on my channel. I'm sort of processing all of this drama going on that Gavin and Jonathan kicked up with this stuff. And I entitled my video "The Orthodox Moment" and the Revitalizing Hallway Pass. And I used that to riff on C.S. Lewis's metaphor of the rooms and the hallway. And the various Christian churches are like the rooms. And the rooms are places you live. There are fires, there are pints, that's the home. And the hallway is sort of mere Christianity where people sort of access this. And part of what I saw on YouTube was a lot of people sort of cheering on their latest find, which is awesome, because when someone finds something, it's sort of like falling in love. When you meet a person, they can do no wrong. They're the perfect person. And you want that. And in some ways, when you have a baby, it's that way too, because I think especially as a mom, grows a little bit more slowly for a dad, but suddenly here you have in your arms this person that you've had with you now, you've been feeling for a number of months already, and suddenly there he is, and people have varying different experiences with it, but it's not uncommon to be like, oh my goodness, this person is completely dependent on me, and suddenly you can feel, and you have an identity transformation. And so basically the way I'm connecting these two things is that part of what happens in life is these big things hit you, and as you've just told me about, suddenly you discover, oh my goodness, how many aspects of Christianity has the church been going on about for 2,000 years across the world, throughout time, and suddenly I was at home, raised, nurtured, felt secure enough to be big and bold to myself promote. And now suddenly it's disorienting seeing, wow, how does this work? So I'm curious about, for you, after your son was born, what about the birth of your son and your vocation? How did those two things sort of interact?
Yeah, so I would say two things, I guess, were at the bottom of why this, that precipitated this crisis, and then I'll come on to how that, I guess, feeds into the vocation stuff. But one is that having a baby was like a confrontation with the reality of raw human existence, and it forced me to face questions about human existence that just hadn't been urgent to me before, because I existed, but I wasn't responsible for my own existence. I had other people to blame for that. But this child, to an extent, I was responsible for his existence in the world. And so there was a level of urgency to the questions of the fundamental value of human existence, and the relationship between human beings and the transcendent, and the story that we're a part of that pressed itself right up against me after I had my son. I'm aware from mothers groups I attended that I should have been thinking more about feed schedules or something. But unfortunately, I was just thinking about raw human existence and why it mattered. There were two things about that, like looking at my son. One was the kind of arbitrariness of where and when he was born. And I found myself asking questions of what his, not what his life would have been like if he were born in a different place or time, but what his faith would be if he was born in a different place in a different time. What his exposure to Christianity would have been. As a Protestant, I kind of realized at this time that I had thought that if you were born prior to the 16th century and after the 1st century, you probably couldn't find out what Christianity was. Like, I think I'd actually erased that part of church history and invalidated it in how I thought about what it meant to relate to God, which I'm ashamed to admit that now.
Why are you ashamed to admit that? You hold yourself to really high standards.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
It's okay to be wrong.
Yeah, I think the embarrassment of, I don't think there's much more embarrassing than like arrogance and realizing that you were arrogant in the past. And the fear of, what am I being arrogant about now? So that's why I say that I feel kind of ashamed of that. So the kind of arbitrary nature of where and when he was born, and then the fragility of him, and thinking about the fact that he was born and one day he would die, and his life would be a fleeting moment in the grand span of human history, and certainly in the history of the world, which is where all this dinosaur crisis came from. Recently I've been reflecting on the fact that the scriptures say over and over again this phrase that I used to find repellent and didn't want to hear it, which is that all human beings are like grass, and they're here one day and thrown into the fire the next. And that so didn't sit with the version of Christianity that didn't sit with how I'd been taught to think about myself in light of faith growing up, that I was this significant and special masterpiece that God was weaving, and also my own sense of like the significance of me as an individual, and all this cultural stuff that I'd picked up of how kind of essential my personhood and my existence and my individuality is. And I began to kind of seeing my son and reflecting on his life. This sounds awful, actually, for a mother to say this, but I wasn't struck by, first and foremost, I wasn't struck by how valuable he was. I was struck by how relatively insignificant in the span of human history his life was. And how that didn't match with my own, feelings about his life and my life. Yeah. And I hope he never listens to this recording when he's older. So that really began to shift, I guess, the story that I had about human beings, and also, I was brought up very much with this idea that, having this relationship with Jesus is the cure to feeling unwanted, unloved, and alone in the world. That the gospel is God loves you and Jesus died for you, and therefore you don't have to feel unwanted, unloved, and alone. And I thought about all the people who live in parts of the world or stages in human history that hadn't heard the good news about Jesus, and therefore, well, what was that? Did they just have a life where they felt unwanted, unloved, and alone?
Well, Becky is dinosaurs. It's just Becky, so don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So that was one thing that really caused me to waver on the things that I'd been taught and the things I myself had taught others about their value and how they fitted into the story of humanity and God's story. And then the other piece of that, I guess, was something that has just left my mind. It was, I guess, coming to realize that, I've lost it.
That's okay. So, the revitalizing hall pass. Can you see, with a degree of irony, can you see that some of the transformations that have happened in you over the last couple of years have, despite the faith journey, which is really precarious right now, and the felt relationship, which feels really precarious right now, can you see how this crisis has maybe given you some Christian upgrades? Yeah.
This, and actually, I would say where I am now is my faith is stronger than ever before, but unrecognizable from what it was before. And even to the extent that sometimes I look back and think, was I just performing Christianity, even to myself? I don't think I had allowed so that was the other thing, that suffering, the reality of suffering was just not something I'd allowed to enter into my understanding of the life of faith. Mm-hmm. And I knew conceptually that, everyone's told, just because you follow Jesus, it doesn't mean that life will be easy. But I hadn't experienced that for myself. Yeah. And there were two things that haunted me and I couldn't let go of, and did kind of give me like a thread of sustenance for my faith to continue through the other side of this experience. And one of those things was I was haunted by the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that was the only story that could actually reach me in the place that I was after I had my son. It did still, it was a story that was speaking to me. Yeah. And the other thing was I had a dream while I was pregnant. And, I've been a Christian my whole life, thought a lot about Jesus, talked about Jesus a lot. I'd never had a dream about Jesus. And I know that because, or certainly not that I'd remembered, and I know that because I used to think it was odd, and I used to wonder, in my subconscious, am I really a Christian? Because I've never had a dream about Jesus. And he's not in my, I don't talk about God in my dreams, and I don't evangelize in my dreams, and so what's going on there? So when I was pregnant, I had this dream where I'd been sentenced to death. And actually, that's not unusual for me. I have dreams about all sorts of strange things like that. So I had this dream that I'd been sentenced to death. And the way that I was to be executed was that I would be put down this unending abyss. And sorry, this is so dark.
It's great, keep going.
So all my family and friends were there, and they were there to reluctantly say goodbye to me, and nobody could, there was nothing to be done to prevent me from having to go down this abyss. And Jesus appeared in my dream, and you know how you just know that someone is who they are in a dream, like.
Yeah.
And my faith up until that point, I guess, would deep down have said to me, like, the solution that Jesus will offer in that scenario is that he will say, I will take your place for you. I'll sacrifice myself on your behalf. But that's not what Jesus said to me in my dream. He said, I'll come down with you. And that's what happened. And so, like, that dream, I don't even feel like I need to claim any special religious experience with that dream. I think just that, what that taught me and how that image began to reshape my understanding of especially suffering's place in this life was to see suffering as, you know, in the story of Jesus, suffering is the means by which new creation comes about. And that's absolutely what's happened in my life. I could see that was happening even while my faith hadn't returned yet. I could see that I was changing, and I could see that I was valuing the things that needed to be valued and putting aside the things that were of little value. And I could see that my dependence on others and their dependence on me was growing, and that my relationships and my honesty were changing, and the way I spent my time was being redeemed. And yeah, ultimately I feel like that dream has become for me like a picture of what that was, and it's made me believe that actually what I was experiencing wasn't divine hiddenness, as you would call it. It was divine presence, and that's actually the place I came to, was believing like maybe this whole experience is what it means for God to be present. Maybe I don't need to look for these experiential clues that I'd relied upon in the past and been encouraged to find. And certainly on the vocation side, that's very much the kind of language we would use, would be kind of come and meet Jesus and have this experience of this encounter with Jesus. And I guess I lost that sort of. I feel like that's an exchange of like discovering something truly transcendent, and we've exchanged that for like immediacy, like an actual kind of this moment of supernatural encounter. Whereas actually that whole experience of just day to day trying to survive, trying to make it through, trying to find some hope, weeping, trembling in the night, like I think that was, I now believe that was I was encountering God, because I was coming to face with reality. I'd never been faced with reality properly before, and that's where it's taken my faith, is believing that God is the objective reality. And also that experience, I knew that it meant something. Like, even the experience of like thinking maybe life is meaningless, that was the most meaningful thing it was the deepest feeling I'd ever felt, was my response to maybe life is meaningless. Maybe I have to go on believing I love my husband when I haven't got a basis for what love is, and maybe I have to go on, believing that my child's life is meaningful when I don't have any ultimate meaning to appeal to. The grief that I felt alongside that told me it was the most meaningful thing that had ever happened. And I guess that kind of, I was faced with a choice, I guess, at that point. And will I live by faith and believe that this is meaningful, and at the end of the day, that was all I wanted. I didn't even, it was like I didn't even need the suffering to go away. I just need the suffering to mean something. I've found that as I live by faith in that, I am seeing Jesus more and more as the vision we have of him from the book of Colossians, which says he is the one in whom all things hold together. And yeah, that was my story over the past few years, and it continues to be. Yeah.
So, vocationally, you left the church. Where are you at with church now?
Yeah. So I had to share that I was going through this crisis because I knew I could probably pretend. But like you said, you know, it's not a viable option. So I had to share that this was the case, and I extended my maternity leave. And I feel really sadly, ultimately, I lost my credibility. And so when I returned, I was obviously wrestling, but it wasn't that I was wrestling so much with the fundamentals anymore. I was just simply somebody who now wanted to wrestle with things and wanted to engage, wanted to like filter everything through, like, would what we're saying this Sunday mean something to somebody who's in the pit? Like, and just 9 times out of 10, it just seemed to me that the answer was no, this doesn't really matter for them. Like, this isn't really relevant to them. And I guess I was starting to vocalize that. The church is I've been a part of are very strategic, very focused on setting a 5-year vision, and just off the back of my maternity leave, we announced this sort of 5-year vision for growth, and I just couldn't
How inconvenient.
I just sadly I just couldn't. We couldn't make it. We couldn't fit it together, and so I was told that I wasn't trusted for the role anymore, and so so I left. And the honest answer to your question is I feel pretty disillusioned with organized church right now, and like wholly committed to trying to embody a life of faith with others, but really disillusioned with the organizational aspect of it.
Yeah. It's such a hard thing because, I mean, as the old song says, you know the world from both sides now. And on one hand, if likely in your previous life, if you were part of that church, you would have said, hey, we've got a 5-year plan here. We've got deals to cut with sinners, and but it does sound, and the dream. This is part of the reason. People will often say things to me because I'm on the internet, so you get everybody piping in, and do you really believe that God does miracles and God talks to us? I heard your story. and I just laugh when people ask me that question because you're certainly not alone. But it's also the case that it's your dream, and someone else might doubt it. Someone else might say, "Oh, look, it's the dream." And for you, it's probably somewhere in the middle because it's your dream. And do I remember? I mean, there's just, your mind can go 1,000 places. And it can cut those deals 1,000 ways. And there you are in the middle, but it's not theoretical for you. It's absolutely essential for you, because these major questions that you have lived your life upon and want to continue to live your life upon in integrity are suddenly way more complex. And it's easy and perhaps even glib for me to look at it from this position and say, wow, Jesus has really been working. It's a nice thing to have never suffered. And it's a gift that if we look back on ourselves before we have suffered, it's a gift we should probably just receive with gratitude and say, what an awesome thing it was to have not have tasted that bitterness. And yet, it's also a gift to have suffered and survived. But it's a weird thing to live with everything that those crises have bestowed upon you. And it's so funny because I would imagine even in your previous life, all of these truths that were very theoretical, about, oh yeah, hard things happen. Until they happen to you. And, but now suddenly you have an unasked for credibility about some things. And I wonder, just listening to you a little bit, you seem a little hard on your old self. Are you?
I'm pretty disappointed in her.
Why?
Well, I suppose just the benefit of hindsight. Yeah. Yeah, I guess your question implies that you think I shouldn't be so hard on.
I know so many people that would give their eye teeth to have the life that you used to have. It sounds like you had a good family. Nobody has a perfect family, but you had a good family. You're surrounded by a loving church. You had a degree of certainty that, looking back on it now, you might say, all right, maybe I was a little naive, and maybe I was guilty of arrogance. And yeah, you probably were. But in a strange way, you've been delivered from that, which is exactly the program that your old life would say Jesus is about. Because when, we talk about Jesus working on us, it's basic Christian doctrine, mortification and sanctification. Well, we like talking about sanctification. We talk about that a whole lot more. And because mortification just sucks. It really does. Because parts of you have to die, and they are parts of you. And just looking through the lens of your story, they're parts of your life, and they were good. They really were. And it's not unusual to have, the birth. There are a lot of people that say, and anybody here, I don't want to offend anyone here. There are a lot of people that say you're really not an adult until you have a child. And I don't want to push that too hard, but there's a degree of truth to it that you understood, because suddenly holding this little child in your hand, you saw the world through a different lens other than that lens that you were using before. And of course the dominoes would have to fall on this. And I would love, and you much more than I would love to have had the story go that the church you were a part of would have been patient and understanding, and I just, without knowing any of it, just a shallow opinion would be that, wow, if that church could have done that, they could have benefited from the transformations that Jesus is working in you. And that then could have gone into their church. But I am, the older I get, I try not to be too hard on a church like that, because probably the truth is a church like that is meeting a whole bunch of people in the place that they're in now. And that's a good thing. And like I said, this revitalizing hallway pass, I think, is a real thing. And so it sounds like Jesus decided, well, we're going to work on Becky's pretty full of herself and she's a little arrogant, and we're going to take care of that. And but that's really good for Jesus to do if he's going to make saints out of us. And so, probably finding a little bit of grace for Becky 1.0 wouldn't be a bad thing as you continue to interact with people who are where you used to be. Because if you can't extend grace to yourself, you're probably going to have a hard time extending grace to them. And as any level of Christian should understand, that whole business about grace and forgiveness, it's kind of Christianity 101. So Cassidy, I don't know how I was a little nervous about this section because I do a lot of randos, and I don't mean this against any of the people who had boring randos. It's not a bad thing to have a boring life. And not everybody can tell their story well. But you've been through a journey. Are you? Well, see, now in some ways getting let loose also means freedom. And you can make decisions about Christian vocation or not. Or, just because you're not employed by a church doesn't mean as a Christian you're not charged with Christian duty. So, what are your thoughts for the future at this point? Have you found another church home? Are you still sort of wandering around, thinking, exploring, waiting?
So I guess for the time being, my husband and I have just talked about, hey, what if we just opened up our home a couple of times a week and invited, so I'm even hesitant saying that because what we really don't want to do is start our own church. And I also know that there's a version of that which is, I don't like what the church is teaching, so, I'll just do
We're
my
very
own.
Protestant. I'll start my own. I will do it right this time.
Yeah. And I'm so interested in the principles that are like undergirding the estuary stuff, because I hear you saying, it's church adjacent, and actually there's stuff that we don't talk about in the church. Like, I just feel kind of like, well, can we bring that in? Like, could that be a way of being for people who are trying to gather around faith, living by faith in Jesus, and opening the door to others as well? And what would it look like if we just said to a bunch of people, hey, our home's open, but it's not something that, we're not your leaders, like, our home's open. We really want to learn more and more of what it means to live by faith, and we want to embody that in a community, and do you fancy doing that with us? Feel like I'm really open to be challenged on this, but I feel like that's the best option available to us for us to actually do it. Like, I feel like a lot of the other options would render us a little bit more passive in living a life devoted to our faith.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we've talked about for the time being. But I'm a little uneasy about it, but I also, just going through this experience and seeing, I mean, because I guess this would be the same for you, when you're on the inside of church ministry, you see why things are done, you see the conversations that happen in private, you see some of the agendas that can easily be at play. And I do know that I'm speaking from like quite a specific kind of a church. I think I'd be very at home going back to the kind of Anglican church I went to growing up. There just isn't one around us. So I kind of think, and it's like one of the things I came to through this experience was like the universality of this faith, and this, this is the God who is the creator of the world, and what He's calling us to be is even dinosaurs. Like, what He's calling us to is to be the new humanity, not to be Christians. And like, for so many of the Christians I know and have grown up with, going to church is the language of faith. Like, and that's what, if you imagine what is it to be a Christian, it's going to church. And I guess we want more than that. So we're trying to maybe just get started in just living that out in some way and see what happens next, I guess.
That makes sense. I'll let you know why I always see Estuary as church adjacent. So we do Estuary at 9 a.m. every Sunday morning. Our service is at 11. We did it I always wanted to do it on Sunday, but we didn't have a slot. And Sunday school was, even though I had hundreds of people that enjoyed watching my Sunday school online, I only had a few people in the room. And so I went to the council, because we're a Christian Reformed church. It's more of a Presbyterian polity. I went to the council and said, how about we do Estuary at 9 o'clock on Sunday mornings? And because I had been doing it in the evenings, I could never get church people involved in Estuary. I had plenty of non-church people that would come at night to Estuary. So I said, let's try it at 9 a.m. and let's do it every week. And as it turned out, we still have other meetings that meet at night, and for a lot of people like in the Estuary space that are in their 20s and 30s, they're not Christians, 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning is not their favorite hour. I get older people, and I get some church people. It's about half and half, church, non-church. But what happens in the Estuary meeting, I think it's important to keep it church adjacent for the Estuary. Because once I bring it into church, there are other dynamics that rightfully come to play. And so what I've discovered now doing this is that some people come into the Estuary and they just love it for what it is. And they have very little interest about Christianity. They have no desire about Christianity. They just begin to enjoy the Estuary community. And then they start spending all this time in the Estuary with Christians. Questions start to emerge. And for some people, the hour then becomes convenient because they're already at church at 9, and when they have questions, they just have to stay at 11. And at 11, it's a very different thing. There's liturgy, there's sermon, there's different people in the room that don't come to Estuary. So I really like it as church adjacent because I think it helps Estuary stay Estuary. And it helps the atheists and the people of other religions and the people of no religion, not even atheism. It just lets them all be them and to talk about whatever they need to talk about. And like I said, it also helps the church people talk about things that they have more, that they're not going to bring up in their Bible study. Because, as you know from the church environment, you start disclosing certain things in some church spaces, you lose status. And if there's one thing people really hate, as you experienced, it's losing status. That is painful. So I really like it adjacent. At the same time, I'm towards the end of my career, and I'll probably never switch churches. Sorry to disappoint. I don't think I would ever pastor a church without an estuary. I find it so useful, pastorally, evangelistically. Why evangelistically? It's not the Alpha program or the 3-2-1 program. No, it's not any of those things. But it helps church people build really good community and relationships with unchurched people. And there's just potential there. And it also helps church people deal with crap that church creates, because it always does. So I think there's good reason to sort of keep it separately. Church, oh boy, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But church is complicated, and it is. And I just want to say I admire and I want to encourage you and your husband to continue exploring and asking these deep questions. You're certainly not the first ones to ask these questions or to go through what you've been going through. And I am a Protestant, and what that means is it does afford me a degree of flexibility on how churches try to address the moments that they're found in and the context that they are in. So I think, I'm kind of excited hearing your story. I don't know what God is going to do, but if Jesus basically said, "Take my hand, I'm going to jump in with you," I don't think he's going to stop being with you. And I don't think he's brought you on this journey for nothing. And that doesn't mean that there won't be other hardships and other disappointments coming. But I'm kind of excited by your story. And I think, I'm towards the end of my career. I've lived a few decades now. And I can see that he has used things in my life, some things that I really wish, really wish he had never brought me through. But, so I'm Christian Reformed, and we have the Heidelberg Catechism. It begins with this first question and answer. What is your only comfort in life and in death? And it starts out with these audacious words, that I am not my own, which unseats that. I'm the center of the universe. I'm not even my own. There's already someone else who's at the center of the universe. But I belong body and soul, in life and in death, to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ, who has fully paid for all my sins with his precious blood and has set me free from the tyranny of the devil. He watches over me in such a way that, and I always find this to be such an ironic illustration, that not a hair can fall from my head without the will of my Father in heaven. And he's going to use this to make things work out, not just for me, but for his world. And so I just want to thank you for your story and for the vulnerability that you showed to share this with us.
Thank you. Well, and I just want to say to that this space created the possibility of me being able to be vulnerable like that, because from the first session this morning, I was floored by the honesty of the conversation. So thank you for that, because I wouldn't have expressed it in those terms without everything that preceded it today. So thank you. Thank you very much.
I don't know where we're at, our time. Got a few minutes?
One of the delights or non-delights of this conversation, Paul, is that there's no comments section.
Are you? But you just started one, Guy.
I think, obviously, the comment section would be incredibly supportive. I think that Jesus, obviously, is in that deep abyss with you and coming out the other side. It's not working. Do I press them? Okay. I'm just going to keep talking. I can be loud enough. And I think that what it's taught me is that, or reminded me, is that my church doesn't want a theology of suffering. Because when I've mentioned that word to my pastor, he rejected it. He said, there is no theology of suffering. And I think, yeah, exactly. And I would like to say, you have been privileged to go from Becky 1.0 to Becky 1.1 or what, maybe Becky 2.0. I don't know where that is in the journey. But what a privilege. And he is with you, and God bless you. Thank you.
So much for the no comment section.
Now for the abuse.
I was going to ask if you had any questions, because in a Randos Conversations, I usually pester the person maybe for an hour and a half, as I'm so darn nosy. And then, but I do want to give you a chance for you to ask anything. Or
I guess that was a big question I had, was what you were just talking about, which was that like estuary, church adjacent estuary, and then bringing that in. I guess I would just ask for like how you would counsel me on going forwards, and trying to I guess one is trying not to leave this in the rearview mirror, because I can already feel like as I move to a place of like feeling much stronger, and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm quite critical of previous me, is I'm trying to critique her in order that I'm
so
like
she
critiquing
doesn't come
myself.
back.
Yes. So I guess that would be one of my questions, is how do you kind of, once the kind of visceral level of that experience has passed, how do you retain and stay connected to, like, I love have you ever read The Open Church by Jürgen Moltmann?
Years
ago. Like one of the things that he says is about staying connected to who you were, like in ministry, staying connected to who you were when you weren't in ministry, because and like speaking from that place. And I guess that's one of my questions, is how do you navigate that? How do you hold on to the part of yourself that's still wrestling whilst you also teach and instruct? And yeah, that would be my big question, because since then I've been thinking about Paul saying everything I know now is partial and incomplete, which is an amazing thing for someone who wrote the Bible to say. And how do we speak and help others from that place of like speaking with, like lending confidence to others without the pretense of, I think I used to speak from a place that would have made people sound like this is full and complete understanding rather than partial and incomplete. So does it?
Well, I want to say, one thing is that there's like normal time and crisis. You can't live in crisis because you'll just simply burn out. And so you're right in that your baby is, although your kids will keep you on a track, there will be continue to be change, but you do have to somehow settle down again. And so the fear and the feeling that, I was confronted on my arrogance. I was confronted on all of this stuff. I don't want to go back. That's a good thing to keep your eye on. You had a certain sweet relationship with Jesus pre-crisis, And what I've seen in crises like these sometimes, not always, is that you experienced a different kind of relationship with Jesus in the crisis. And you can get nostalgic about that too. Because once sort of normalcy returns, the adrenaline, the drama, the sheer intensity of the crisis relationship now will also be in the rearview mirror. And you can feel guilty about that. And let's say in whatever configuration you and your husband get back into ministry, the banality of ministry, the commonness of ministry, the pragmatism of ministry, the compromise of working in this real world, that will return too. And suddenly you'll be like, wait a minute, I went through the crisis to have a no compromise ministry. And what you will learn is that some of the sins that you can see committed against you or by the old group, you will one day commit or at least be seen as committing. And some 28-year-old is going to look at you and you're 50 and say, you just don't understand. And maybe given what you've been through, maybe you can communicate that or maybe you can't. So if you're going to learn to be a little generous with your past self, you probably should be a little generous with your future self too, because these things will happen. But your impulses are correct. I would say, if at all possible, as you continue to sort of find a new normal, that figure out, one of the things that the church offers us is, when we say community, we think about certain things, but especially when we're in ministry, we need valued, wise people around us who can speak into our lives and help us, especially if you're sort of going into a very new thing. And one of the things that I've seen is that in America, there's so many Christians and so many churches and so much experimentation that you can almost easily find someone. And as you said yourself, you'd love to go to the Anglican type church you grew up in, but there's not one by you now. So what to do? So I think, finding people that you can trust, that you respect, that have some credibility, you can be in relationship with as you and your husband sort of figure out what God might be planning for you in the future. But you will navigate in your relationship with Jesus. Luce Meads was a theologian in the Christian Reformed Church, eventually taught at Calvin College and then Fuller. Wrote a memoir, a lovely memoir, said in his memoir, my wife's been married to 5 different men, and all of them have been me. And that's one of the things that you learn as you grow and as you grow old, that there will be stages. And just like you and your husband are going to continue to change and see each other in different ways, and your relationship is going to change, it's the same with your relationship with Jesus, because you will be changed, and he's already changing you. So that's why it's good to have people around you that you can check in and say, and especially also now, you're a new mom, and if you have more kids, then, with my wife and I, when we had one kid, it's like, oh, we have a little appendage we can still take with us as we go places. Have 2 kids, it's like, oh, that's really inconvenient. 3 kids, oh, and then that's going to change everything too, especially vocationally for you, because being a mom and a dad are different things. So, I don't know if any of that's helpful, but.
No, it is. Thank you.
I didn't know what Cassidy was going to do with this, but Cassidy, you did very well. You did very well. So, and, I really appreciate your openness, and I pray that, well, I don't know, I'm going to break a rule. But it's not a Randos rule. I do this with Randos, but I usually don't do this with Estuary. When I started Estuary, one of the hardest things was I always opened and closed meetings with prayer. And one of the things I had to unteach myself with the estuaries and the meetup was I'm not going to open with prayer. I'm not going to close with prayer because it just makes people nervous. And so, if you want to hear me pray, come to church and let me pray all the time. But with Randos conversations, every now and then, I feel moved by just the nature of the conversation. If people ask me, I always say yes, but would it be okay if I'd pray for you? Let me pray. Lord, I thank you for Becky. I thank you that you are the Savior that doesn't just jump in for us, but jumps in with us. And Lord, she's been through a big transformation. There's been a lot of loss. There's been pain. There might even be some scars. But she has a new relationship with you. She has a child. She has a marriage. She doesn't quite know what church is going to look like. She sees possibility with Estuary. I just pray, Lord, that you bless her, that you guide her. I pray, Lord, that you bring the right kind of people around her that can give her wisdom, that can encourage her, that can, if she's worried or anxious about something, that can bring her comfort, that can point her towards you. So I pray, Lord, that you bless her. And Lord, I suspect that you are bringing her on adventures that she can't now imagine. And not all of them will be happy. But I pray, Lord, that that dream that you gave her will stay with her. And that when the time is dark and when there seems to be no light, that she will know that you are with her and you will never leave her nor forsake her. So I thank you, Lord, that she found this estuary space, that she's been enjoying this conference. And I ask, Lord, that you would guide her steps and give her your peace. This I pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.